Turning 55 should have been a milestone worth celebrating. Instead, I found myself standing in my empty kitchen on a Tuesday morning, staring at a text message that would change everything between my daughter and me. The words on the screen were simple, but they hit like a punch to the gut. Dad, I'm canceling your party, you're just too embarrassing. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole mess started 3 weeks earlier, when my daughter Rebecca came over for our usual Sunday dinner. She'd been living in her downtown apartment for 2 years now, working as a marketing coordinator for some tech startup, and every week she'd drive the 40 minutes to our suburban home in Maplewood Heights to catch up and enjoy my famous barbecue ribs. That particular Sunday, she seemed different, more polished somehow. Her hair was styled in some complicated way that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and she kept checking her phone every few minutes with this nervous energy I'd never seen before. "Dad," she said, poking at her coleslaw, "I've been thinking about your birthday party." I looked up from my plate, surprised. My birthday was still 3 weeks away, but Rebecca had insisted on throwing me a big celebration this year. She'd been planning it for months, talking about renting the community center, inviting all my old colleagues from the factory, and even hiring a DJ. The whole thing seemed excessive to me, but she was so excited about it that I went along with her plans. "What about it, sweetheart?" She set down her fork and took a deep breath. "Well, I've invited some people from work, important people. My boss, Marcus Wellington, and his wife, some clients. And I was thinking," she paused, looking uncomfortable, "maybe we could make a few adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" Rebecca pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what looked like notes. "Well, first, I think we should ask everyone to dress a bit more formally. You know, business casual instead of just casual." I raised an eyebrow. For 30 years, I'd worked the assembly line at Henderson Manufacturing, and every birthday party I'd ever had was a backyard barbecue with beer, burgers, and my buddies from work wearing their usual jeans and polo shirts. "Rebecca, it's my birthday party. I want people to be comfortable." "I know, Dad, but these work people, they're used to a certain kind of environment. I just want to make a good impression." Something in her tone bothered me, but I shrugged it off. "Okay, fine. Business casual it is. What else?" She consulted her phone again. "Maybe instead of having Uncle Tony tell his Vietnam stories, we could have some background music. Something more sophisticated." Uncle Tony was my younger brother, a guy who could make anyone laugh with his stories about army life and his adventures as a long-haul trucker. He'd been the life of every family gathering for 20 years. "Rebecca, Uncle Tony's stories are hilarious. Everyone loves them. I know they're funny to the family, but—" She trailed off, and I could see her struggling with something. "Look, Dad, I'm up for a promotion at work, senior marketing coordinator. It comes with a 30% raise, and my own office. This part, it's kind of like a networking opportunity for me." That's when it started to click. This wasn't really about my birthday anymore. This was about Rebecca's career, and somehow my 55th birthday party had become her professional showcase. Over the next 2 weeks, the adjustments kept coming. She called me on Wednesday to suggest we switch from barbecue to catered Italian food from some upscale place downtown. On Friday, she mentioned that maybe I should wear the navy suit I'd bought for her college graduation instead of my usual khakis and button-down shirt. Then came the conversation about my hobbies. I've been building model trains since I was 12 years old. My basement is a wonderland of miniature towns, complete with working streetlights, tiny people, and trains that run on schedule. It's taken me 43 years to build what I have down there, and I'm proud of every mountain, every building, every perfectly painted boxcar. Over the years, I'd given tours to neighbors, colleagues, and anyone who showed interest. People were always amazed by the detail and craftsmanship. "Dad," Rebecca said during one of her planning calls, "maybe we shouldn't mention the train set to my work people." "Why not? I thought you loved the trains. You used to help me paint the little figures when you were 8. I did love it, and I still think it's nice. But these are sophisticated people, Dad. They're into wine tasting, and golf, and, I don't know, art galleries. Model trains might seem a little childish to them. Childish. The word stung more than I expected. 43 years of meticulous work, thousands of hours of careful craftsmanship, dismissed as childish because it didn't fit into Rebecca's new professional image. But I bit my tongue. This promotion clearly meant everything to her, and if keeping quiet about my trains would help her get it, I could do that. The final straw came 2 days before the party. Rebecca showed up at my house, unannounced, which was unusual. She looked frazzled, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dad, we need to talk. I was in the garage, organizing tools for a project I was planning. Sure, sweetheart. What's on your mind? She took a deep breath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to promise me you'll consider it seriously. Okay. Promise me you won't tell any of your factory stories at the party. I stopped organizing and turned to face her fully. What factory stories? You know the ones. About the time Jerry got his finger stuck in the press, or when the whole line shut down because of that pigeon, or any of those stories about your buddies and the crazy things that happened over the years. These weren't just random stories, they were 30 years of my life. Some were funny, some were touching. All of them were part of who I was. The time we all pitched in to buy Christmas presents for Martinez's kids when he got laid off. The morning we found old Pete sleeping in his car because his wife had kicked him out, and how we all took turns letting him shower at our houses until they worked things out. The day the whole factory floor celebrated when Sarah became the first woman promoted to floor supervisor. Rebecca, those aren't just stories, that's my life. Those people were my friends, my family for 3 decades. I know, Dad, and I respect that. I really do. But my boss, he went to Harvard Business School. His wife runs a charity that raises money for the opera. These stories about factory workers and broken machinery, they won't relate to that. Maybe they should relate to it, I said, feeling a flash of anger. Maybe people who've never worked with their hands for a living should hear about people who do. Rebecca's face flushed. Dad, please. I'm not asking you to be ashamed of your job. I'm proud of how hard you worked. But this one night, can't you just be someone different? Someone more professional? Someone different. She wasn't asking me to tone it down or be more polished. She was asking me to be someone else entirely. Someone who didn't build model trains or tell stories about factory life or have friends named Jerry and Pete and Martinez. I looked at my daughter, this polished young woman in her expensive clothes and perfect makeup, and realized I barely recognized her. When did she become someone who was embarrassed by the man who raised her? I'll think about it, I said, turning back to my tools. She hugged me from behind. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. This promotion is going to change everything for me. After she left, I sat in my garage until well past midnight, thinking about the man I'd apparently become in her eyes. Embarrassing. Unprofessional. Someone who needed to pretend to be different just to be acceptable at his own birthday party. The next morning, I called my brother Tony. You hear about all these rules Rebecca's got for my party? I asked him. Tony laughed. Yeah. She called me yesterday, told me to keep the war stories to a minimum and maybe wear something nice instead of my usual flannel. I told her I'd think about it, but honestly, Jimmy, what's gotten into that girl? She's trying to impress her work people. Apparently we're all too embarrassing for them. Embarrassing? Tony's voice got serious. Jimmy, you raised that girl by yourself after Linda died. You worked double shifts to pay for her college. You taught her to drive, walked her down the aisle at her wedding, helped her through her divorce. And now you're embarrassing? It's complicated, Tony. No, it's not. It's simple. She's forgotten where she comes from, and that's not your problem to fix by pretending to be someone else. That evening, Rebecca called with one final request. She wanted me to put away all the family photos in the living room and replace them with some neutral artwork she'd bought. The photos showed our life together: camping trips, backyard barbecues, the day she graduated high school, Christmas mornings, me teaching her to change a tire in the driveway. "They're too personal," she explained. "I don't need to see all our private family moments." I hung up the phone and walked through my house, looking at those pictures with new eyes. Here was our life, documented in dozens of frames. A good life. A life I'd built with love and sacrifice and pride. A life that was apparently too embarrassing to share with her colleagues. That night, I made a decision. I called Rebecca and told her I needed to talk to her before the party. She came over the next afternoon, the day before my birthday, looking excited and nervous. "Dad, I can't thank you enough for being so understanding about all this. I know it's a lot of changes, but I promise, after I get this promotion, we can go back to regular family parties." Actually, Rebecca, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I told her that I'd been thinking about everything she'd asked me to change, everyone she'd asked me not to invite, all the stories she didn't want me to tell, all the parts of myself she wanted me to hide. "And I realized something," I said. "If I have to pretend to be someone completely different to be acceptable at my own birthday party, then maybe I shouldn't be at this party at all." Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean, have your networking event. Invite your boss and his opera-loving wife, serve the fancy Italian food and play sophisticated music. But don't call it my birthday party, because the man you're describing isn't me." "Dad, you're being dramatic." "Am I? You've told me not to talk about my job, my hobbies, my friends, or my family. You want me to dress differently, act differently, and be someone I'm not. What exactly about me is left to celebrate?" Rebecca stood up, her hands shaking slightly. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. Do you have any idea how important this promotion is? How hard have I worked for it? I'm proud of how hard you've worked, but I won't pretend to be ashamed of who I am, so you can impress people who wouldn't like the real me anyway." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact instant when disappointment turned to anger. "Fine," she said, grabbing her purse. "If you want to sabotage my career over your stubborn pride, that's your choice. But I'm not going to let you embarrass me in front of the most important people in my professional life." "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying the party is canceled. If you can't be trusted to act appropriately, then we won't have a party at all." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. 20 minutes later, I got the text message that would haunt me for days. "Dad, I'm canceling your party. You're just too embarrassing." I sat in my quiet kitchen, looking at those words on my phone screen, and realized that my own daughter had just uninvited me from my own birthday party because she was ashamed of who I was. The silence in the house was deafening. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. The morning of my 55th birthday arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I woke up at 6:30 out of habit, even though I had nowhere to be and nothing planned. The community center booking was canceled. The catered food was canceled. The DJ was canceled. Even the fancy decorations Rebecca had ordered were sitting in boxes in her apartment, useless now. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the backyard where I'd planned to string lights for an after-party. The whole scene felt surreal. In all my 54 previous birthdays, I'd never spent one completely alone. My phone buzzed. A text from Tony. "Happy birthday, brother. I still can't believe what Rebecca did. Want me to come over?" I appreciated the offer, but I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I texted back, "Thanks. I need some time to think." More messages started coming in throughout the morning. Pete from the old factory crew heard about the party situation. "That's rough, Jimmy. You deserved better." Sarah, who'd moved to Phoenix after retirement. "Happy birthday. Sorry to hear about the family drama. Rebecca will come around." Word had gotten out somehow. Probably through Tony. who'd never been good at keeping family business private. By noon, I'd received calls from 6 different people offering to take me out for birthday dinner or inviting me to their houses. Everyone was being kind, but their pity made me feel worse. I spent the afternoon in my basement with the model trains. Running the engines always calmed me down, and I needed that peace. The tiny world down there operated perfectly. The trains ran on time, the streetlights came on when they were supposed to, and everything worked exactly as it should, unlike my real life. While I watched a freight train navigate the mountain pass I'd spent 3 months perfecting, I found myself thinking about Rebecca's words. Embarrassing. Childish. Unprofessional. Maybe she was right. Maybe a 55-year-old man playing with toy trains was pathetic. Maybe telling stories about factory life at a birthday party was inappropriate. Maybe everything I thought made me interesting actually made me a joke. But then I looked closer at my work. The tiny town of Millfield that I'd created wasn't just a collection of miniature buildings. Every structure had a story. The red brick schoolhouse was modeled after the one Rebecca attended until 3rd grade. The train station was a replica of the one where my father used to work as a dispatcher. The small factory on the outskirts of town looked exactly like Henderson Manufacturing, complete with the loading dock where I'd spent so many years. This wasn't childish. This was my life, recreated in perfect miniature detail. Every building, every tree, every tiny painted figure represented something real and meaningful. How could I be ashamed of that? Around 4 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I climbed upstairs, expecting to find Tony ignoring my request for space. Instead, I opened the door to find Marcus Wellington, Rebecca's boss, standing on my front porch. I recognized him from the company photo Rebecca had shown me months ago. Tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive-looking charcoal suit even on a Saturday afternoon. He looked exactly like what I'd imagined. Polished, successful, intimidating. "Mr. Patterson? I'm Marcus Wellington from Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. I know who you are." I didn't invite him in. He looked uncomfortable, which surprised me. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. Rebecca gave me your address some time ago, and I wanted to talk to you." "About what?" "About your birthday party, or rather, about the fact that there isn't going to be one." I studied his face, trying to figure out his angle. "Did Rebecca send you?" "No. She doesn't know I'm here. In fact, she'd probably be mortified if she found out." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Mr. Patterson, may I come in? I promise I won't take much of your time." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him into my living room. He looked around, taking in the family photos Rebecca had wanted me to hide, the comfortable but worn furniture, the model train magazine on the coffee table. "Would you like some coffee?" "That would be nice." "Thank you." I went to the kitchen and poured 2 cups, giving myself time to think. What could Rebecca's boss possibly want to discuss with me? Had she told him some story about why the party was canceled? Was he here to smooth things over for her sake? When I returned with the coffee, I found him standing in front of my bookshelf, looking at a framed photo of Rebecca and me from her high school graduation. "She's a good employee," he said, accepting the cup. "Smart, dedicated, creative. But lately, she's been different." "Different how?" He sat down on my couch and took a sip of coffee. "Overeager, I suppose. Trying too hard to fit into what she thinks our company culture should be. She started name-dropping expensive restaurants she's never been to, claiming familiarity with art exhibits she's clearly researched online, even lying about her weekend plans to make them sound more sophisticated. This was news to me. Rebecca had always been honest, sometimes brutally so. Why would she do that? Because she thinks that's what success looks like. And unfortunately, in some companies she'd be right, but not at Pinnacle. He set down his cup and looked directly at me. "Mr. Patterson, can I tell you why I started my company?" I nodded, curious despite myself. "My father was a plumber in Detroit, worked with his hands, his whole life, just like you. When I was growing up, I was embarrassed by him, embarrassed by our small house, by his work clothes, by the fact that he didn't know anything about wine or classical music or the things my college friends' parents talked about. He paused, staring out my front window. I spent my 20s trying to distance myself from that background. I got an MBA, learned to talk about market strategies and brand positioning, bought expensive suits. I thought I was becoming sophisticated. What changed? My father had a heart attack when I was 32. While he was recovering, I had to help him with his business for a few months. You know what I discovered? He was the smartest businessman I'd ever met. He understood customer service better than any consultant I'd hired. He knew how to solve problems quickly and efficiently. He built lasting relationships with people based on trust and reliability. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity. That's when I realized that authenticity and work ethic matter more than pedigree. When I started Pinnacle, I made a decision to hire people based on their character and skills, not their backgrounds or how well they fit some corporate image. I was starting to understand why he was here. And Rebecca doesn't know this about your company. She's convinced herself that she needs to be someone else to succeed with us. The irony is, the qualities she's trying to hide, her genuine nature, her family loyalty, her connection to real working people, those are exactly what make her valuable. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Mr. Patterson, I had my assistant do some research on you after Rebecca mentioned your birthday party. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to understand what kind of man raised such a dedicated daughter. I took the envelope, puzzled. What kind of research? Did you know that your former supervisor at Henderson Manufacturing still talks about you? He told my assistant that you were the most reliable employee he had in 30 years. Never missed a day, always willing to help train new workers. Organized the annual toy drive that collected gifts for over 200 children. This was embarrassing. It wasn't just me. The whole crew contributed. He also mentioned that you put yourself through night school to learn quality control procedures, then shared that knowledge with everyone on your shift instead of using it to get promoted ahead of them. I had forgotten about that. It was just something that needed doing. And then there's this. He gestured around my living room. Rebecca told me you built model trains, but she made it sound like a casual hobby. What she didn't mention is that you've been featured in 3 different modeling magazines, that you've won awards at regional competitions, and that you volunteer at the Children's Hospital, bringing your portable train sets to entertain young patients. I shifted uncomfortably. How did you find out about the hospital thing? One of my clients is on their board. She remembered your name because her grandson always asks when Mr. Jimmy with the trains is coming back. He stood up and walked over to look at another family photo. Mr. Patterson, I came here because I wanted to meet the man who raised Rebecca Patterson, and I wanted to apologize. For what? For creating a work environment where she feels like she has to hide who she really is. That's on me and my management team. We clearly haven't done a good enough job showing our employees that we value authenticity over image. I didn't know what to say to that. I also wanted to ask you something. He turned back to face me. Would you be willing to let me throw you a proper birthday party? What? Not a networking event, not a corporate showcase. A real birthday party, where you can be yourself and invite the people who actually matter to you. He sat back down. I'd like to host it at my house next Saturday. I'll handle all the arrangements, all the costs. I just want you to bring your friends and family and be exactly who you are. I stared at him, completely confused. Why would you want to do that? Because I think it might teach everyone involved something important, including Rebecca. He leaned back. What do you say? The whole situation was so bizarre that I almost laughed. Rebecca's boss wanted to throw me a birthday party to prove a point to his employee about authenticity. It sounded like something out of a movie. What about Rebecca? Will she be invited? That's up to you. But if she comes, she'll have to accept that it's your party, not hers. Your friends. Your stories. Your way. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to avoid creating more drama. But another part of me was intrigued. When was the last time someone offered to celebrate me exactly as I was? Can I bring my brother Tony? He tells great stories, but some people find them inappropriate for sophisticated companies. Marcus grinned. Mr. Patterson, I spent last weekend listening to my 14-year-old nephew explain the plot of some video game for 3 hours. I think I can handle your brother's stories. And my friends from the factory? The more the better. I'm curious to meet these people you've told me about. I looked around my living room, at the photos Rebecca wanted hidden, at the train magazine she'd asked me to put away, at all the evidence of a life she'd called embarrassing. Okay, I said. Let's do it. Marcus smiled and shook my hand. Excellent. I'll be in touch with the details. And Mr. Patterson? Happy birthday. After he left, I sat alone in my quiet house, trying to process what had just happened. Rebecca's boss had just offered to throw me the birthday party my own daughter had canceled. The whole situation was so strange, I could barely wrap my head around it. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than disappointment and hurt. I felt curious about what would happen next. My phone buzzed with another text from Tony. Just heard something interesting from the Martinez family. Apparently, Rebecca's boss showed up at your house. What's that about? I smiled and texted back. Long story. But Tony, clear your schedule for next Saturday. We're having a party after all. The response came back immediately. Hell yes. Should I bring the Vietnam stories? I looked at my reflection in the dark window and saw a man who was tired of apologizing for who he was. Bring all of them, I typed. It's time people heard what we're really about. Marcus Wellington's house was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of some sterile mansion with white furniture and abstract art, his home was warm and lived in. Family photos covered the piano, kids' drawings hung on the refrigerator, and a golden retriever named Buster greeted everyone at the door with enthusiastic tail wagging. I arrived early Saturday evening to help set up, bringing my brother Tony and my portable train set that I used for hospital visits. Marcus had insisted I bring it, saying his twin 8-year-old grandsons would love it. Uncle Jimmy! The boys appeared the moment I walked in, having apparently been stationed by the window watching for my arrival. Marcus's daughter Sarah introduced herself and explained that she'd told the boys all about my trains after her father described my hobby. Dad says you build whole cities, one of the twins said, bouncing on his toes. Can we see? Can we run the trains? Do they make sounds? Within minutes, I was on my hands and knees in Marcus's living room, setting up the portable layout while 2 8-year-olds peppered me with questions. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Look at that attention to detail, Marcus said, crouching down to examine a tiny park bench I'd painted by hand. How long does something like this take to complete? This particular set? About 6 months of evenings and weekends. But I've been collecting pieces for years. Tony appeared beside us with a beer in his hand, already having made himself at home. You should see his basement setup, Marcus. It's like a whole world down there. Mountains, tunnels, little people going about their business. Jimmy's got this one scene with a tiny circus that actually has working lights. I'd love to see that sometime, Marcus said. And I could tell he meant it. More guests began arriving around 7. Pete showed up first, cleaned up and wearing what was obviously a new shirt, clearly having made an effort despite the casual invitation. He brought his wife Dorothy, who I hadn't seen in months. Jimmy, you look good, Dorothy said, giving me a hug. We were so sorry to hear about the other party's situation. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. This time it was the Martinez family, Carlos, his wife Rosa, and their teenage daughter Sophia. Carlos had been my work partner for 15 years before the plant closed. And seeing him walk into this elegant house felt surreal. Man, your friend has a nice place, Carlos whispered to me. I was nervous about coming, but he seems cool. Marcus overheard and immediately walked over. You must be Carlos. Jimmy's told me so much about you. I understand you two figured out how to reduce waste on the production line by 30%. Carlos looked surprised. Yeah, we did. How did you know about that? Jimmy mentioned it when I asked about his work. That kind of innovation saved the company thousands of dollars. I watched Carlos stand a little straighter, pride replacing nervousness. That was the thing about Marcus. He had a gift for making people feel valued. By 8 o'clock, the house was full of an unlikely mix of people. My old factory crew clustered around the kitchen island, sharing stories and laughing loudly. Marcus's neighbors, a retired professor and his wife who bred show dogs, were deep in conversation with Tony about his trucking adventures. The kids ran between rooms, taking turns operating my train set under careful supervision. Sarah Wellington Chen, Marcus's daughter, found me during a quiet moment. "My dad told me what happened with your daughter," she said. "I hope you don't mind, but it reminded me of something I went through." "Oh?" "When I was in my 20s, I went through a phase where I was embarrassed by Dad's success. Not because he wasn't successful enough, but because he hadn't come from money originally. I was dating this guy from a wealthy family, and I started making excuses for why Dad talked differently than his parents. Why he knew about sports instead of opera. This caught my attention. What happened?" The guy turned out to be a pretentious jerk who looked down on anyone who hadn't been handed everything. Dad never said anything about it, but I could tell I was hurting him. It took me a while to realize that the qualities I was embarrassed by, his authenticity, his work ethic, his genuine interest in people, those were what made him special. She glanced around the room, where her father was listening intently to Pete's story about the time their whole shift worked through Christmas Eve to fill an emergency order. "Your daughter will figure it out eventually. Sometimes we have to lose something to understand its value." Around 8:30, just as Marcus was calling everyone to gather for the birthday toast, the doorbell rang one more time. Marcus went to answer it, and I heard him say, "Rebecca, I wasn't sure you'd come." My daughter appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain and overdressed in a black cocktail dress and heels. She'd clearly expected a different kind of party. Her eyes swept the room, taking in Tony's animated conversation with the professor, the kids playing trains, Carlos and Rosa laughing with Dorothy about something. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. "Hello, Rebecca." The room had gone quiet, everyone sensing the tension. Marcus stepped forward smoothly. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Rebecca Patterson, Jimmy's daughter and one of my most valued employees." Tony, bless him, broke the awkward moment by walking over with his usual grin. "Rebecca, haven't seen you in months. You look beautiful, sweetheart." She accepted his hug, but I could see her scanning the room nervously. This was exactly the kind of gathering she'd worked so hard to avoid. Working-class people telling stories. Kids making noise. No sophisticated conversation about art or wine. Marcus raised his glass. "Before we get to the birthday toast, I want to say something to everyone here. This party exists because I learned something important about Jimmy Patterson that I think you should all know." I felt my face flush. "Marcus, that's not necessary." "Actually, it is." He looked around the room. "How many of you know that Jimmy volunteers at Children's Hospital bringing his trains to entertain kids during treatment?" Several people looked surprised, including Rebecca. I'd never mentioned the hospital visits to her, or that he personally organized scholarship fundraisers at Henderson Manufacturing for employees' children, helping send 12 kids to college over the years. This was getting embarrassing. "Marcus, please." Or that when Pete here broke his leg and couldn't work for 3 months, Jimmy organized a rotation where different people covered Pete's shifts so he could still draw full pay. Pete's eyes were getting watery. "Jimmy, I never knew you set that up. The point is," Marcus continued, "we live in a world that often mistakes loudness for leadership, credentials for character, polish for substance. But the best people I know, the people who actually make a difference, they're usually too busy doing good work to talk about it." He raised his glass higher. "So here's to Jimmy Patterson. A man who builds beautiful things, tells great stories, raised an amazing daughter, and makes everyone around him better just by being exactly who he is." The room erupted in applause, and hear shouts. I felt overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance. This was what I'd wanted for my 55th birthday, to be celebrated for who I actually was. Rebecca was standing apart from the group, tears streaming down her face. After the toast died down and conversations resumed, she approached me. "Dad, can we talk privately?" We stepped out onto Marcus's back patio. The evening air was cool and quiet compared to the warmth and noise inside. "I had no idea about the hospital visits," she said. "Or the scholarship thing. Or what you did for Pete. Those weren't things I needed to brag about. But they're things I should have known, things I should have been proud to tell people." She wiped her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "I've been such an idiot." I waited for her to continue. "When I heard Marcus was throwing you a party, I was furious. I thought he was trying to embarrass me, or prove some point about my judgment. So I came here tonight ready to damage control, to make excuses for everyone and everything." She gestured toward the house, where we could hear Tony's laughter booming through the windows. "But watching everyone in there, they're not embarrassing, Dad. They're real. They care about each other. They have interesting stories and skills and experiences." She took a shaky breath. "I'm the embarrassing one." "Rebecca, no. Let me finish. I've spent the last year trying to be someone I'm not, because I thought that's what success looked like. I've been name-dropping restaurants I've never been to, pretending to know about art I've never seen, lying about my weekends to sound more sophisticated. This matched what Marcus had told me earlier. The worst part is, I convinced myself I was doing it for my career. But really, I was doing it because I was ashamed of where I came from. Ashamed of you." She started crying harder. "And you're the best man I know." I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake against my chest. "You're not ashamed of me, sweetheart. You're just trying to figure out who you want to be. But I already know who I want to be. I want to be someone like you. Someone authentic, and kind, and proud of their family." We stood there for several minutes while she collected herself. Through the patio door, we could see the party continuing inside. Marcus was now examining my train set with genuine fascination, asking technical questions about the electrical systems. The twins were showing Carlos's daughter Sophia how to operate the crossing signals. "Dad, I need to tell you something about work." "What about it?" "I didn't get the promotion." I pulled back to look at her face. "What happened?" "They gave it to someone else. Someone with less experience but more authenticity, I guess." Marcus told me that I'd been trying so hard to be impressive that I'd stopped being genuine. He said the person they promoted was someone who brought their real self to work every day. This explained a lot about her emotional state tonight. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "Don't be." He was right. I was so busy performing sophistication that I forgot to actually be good at my job. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture that reminded me of her as a little girl. But he also told me something else. "What's that?" "He said the promotion would open up again in 6 months. And if I spent that time being the person I actually am instead of who I think I should be, I'd have a real shot at it." I smiled. "And who are you actually?" "I'm the daughter of Jimmy Patterson. I'm someone who grew up learning that hard work matters more than appearances, that loyalty counts for more than connections, and that the best stories come from real experiences with real people." She looked through the window at Tony, who was now showing Marcus's neighbors photos on his phone of the custom truck cab he'd decorated with murals. "I'm someone whose uncle tells the best Vietnam stories in 3 states, whose father builds the most incredible model trains you've ever seen, and whose family knows how to throw a party where everyone feels welcome." "That sounds about right. Dad, I want to ask you something, and I promise I'll understand if you say no." "What is it?" "Would you let me throw you another birthday party? A real one this time. In our backyard, with barbecue and beer and all the stories anyone wants to tell." I pretended to consider this seriously. "Will Uncle Tony be allowed to tell his Vietnam stories?" "I'm counting on it." "And I can invite Pete and Carlos and the whole factory crew?" "I was hoping you would. And you won't try to hide the train set or the family photos or anything else about our actual life?" "Dad, I want to show off our actual life. I want everyone to see what an amazing father I have and what a good life he built for us. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw past the expensive dress and professional makeup to the little girl who used to help me paint tiny figures for my train set. She was still in there, just buried under a year's worth of trying to be someone else. Okay, I said. But I have one condition. Anything. Next time, just ask me to be myself from the beginning. It would save us both a lot of trouble. She laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd heard from her in months. Deal. We went back inside to rejoin the party, and I watched Rebecca transform before my eyes. She kicked off her heels, asked Tony to tell her his favorite trucking story, and spent 20 minutes on the floor with the twins learning how to operate the train controls. When Marcus asked her about her marketing work, she didn't try to impress him with industry jargon. Instead, she told him about a campaign she'd developed to help a small family restaurant increase their customer base, and how satisfying it had been to see their business grow. "That's the Rebecca I hired," Marcus said to me quietly. I was wondering where she'd gone. As the evening wound down and guests started to leave, people kept approaching me to say how much they'd enjoyed themselves. Dorothy hugged me and said it had been the best party she'd attended in years. Carlos shook Marcus's hand and told him he was welcome at their house any time. The twins begged me to bring my trains back again soon, and Marcus's daughter Sarah invited Rebecca and me to their family barbecue the following weekend. "This is what success actually looks like," Marcus said as we watched people say their goodbyes. "Real relationships with real people who care about each other." Rebecca came up beside us, carrying her heels and looking happier than I'd seen her in months. "Dad, thank you for being patient with me while I figured this out." "Thank you for figuring it out." As we drove home together, Rebecca asked me to tell her about the hospital visits and the scholarship program and all the other parts of my life I'd never bothered to mention because they seemed ordinary to me. "Nothing about you is ordinary, Dad," she said. "I just forgot how to see it." The next week, Rebecca called to say she'd had the best performance review she'd gotten in a year. Apparently, being herself was working out better than being impressive. And 2 weeks later, she threw me the birthday party she'd promised. In our backyard with barbecue and beer and everyone telling whatever stories they wanted to tell. It was perfect, just like I always knew it could be. 3 months after Marcus's party, my life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected. The phone calls from Rebecca became regular again, but different this time. Instead of brief check-ins filled with small talk about her job, we had real conversations about everything from her struggles with workplace politics to my ongoing projects in the basement. But the biggest change came from an unexpected source. I was in my garage on a Tuesday morning, working on a custom train car I'd promised to build for the children's hospital, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a California area code. "Mr. Patterson? This is Jennifer Chen from Pacific Model Railways. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Pacific Model Railways was one of the most prestigious model train companies in the country. I'd been reading their magazine for 20 years but never imagined I'd get a call from them. "Not at all. How can I help you?" "Well, sir, we received some photographs of your work from Marcus Wellington. He thought we might be interested in featuring your layouts in our upcoming issue about innovative home installations." I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry. What?" "Your basement setup, particularly the Mountain Pass section, and the working carnival. Mr. Wellington sent us detailed photos along with descriptions of your building techniques. Our editorial team was quite impressed. Marcus had taken photos at my house the week after the party, when he'd stopped by with his grandsons to see the full basement layout. I'd given him permission to share them with model railroad friends, but I never expected this. We'd like to send a photographer and writer to document your work for a 6-page feature article. Would you be interested?" After I hung up, still somewhat in shock, I called Marcus immediately. "You did what?" He laughed. "Jimmy, I told you that your work deserved recognition. Pacific Model Railways reaches thousands of serious hobbyists. This could open doors you never imagined." "What kind of doors?" "Well, for starters, custom commissions. Do you have any idea what collectors pay for handcrafted layouts?" I didn't. But I was about to find out. The photography session happened 2 weeks later. Jennifer Chen turned out to be a woman about Rebecca's age, who knew more about model railroading than most men I'd met. She spent 4 hours in my basement asking detailed questions about my techniques and taking notes on everything from my weathering methods to my electrical systems. Mr. Patterson, how long have you been developing these custom lighting effects? About 15 years. It started when I wanted the carousel at the carnival to actually light up and spin. And this mountain tunnel system, the way you've created the illusion of depth using forced perspective, where did you learn that technique? Trial and error. Mostly. I read about it in an old railroad magazine and spent about 6 months figuring out how to make it work. The photographer, a quiet man named David, kept shaking his head in amazement. I've shot layouts all over the country, and I've never seen detail work this precise. Look at this. Every window in every building has individual curtain. My wife Linda started those before she passed. I just kept up the tradition. Jennifer's expression softened. How long ago did you lose her? 12 years now. She used to say the little people in my town needed privacy, so she made tiny curtains for all the windows. After she died, I kept making them. Seemed wrong to leave the windows bare. That detail made it into the article, along with a photo of Linda's sewing basket, which I still kept next to my workbench. When the magazine came out 6 weeks later, I found myself staring at a 6-page spread titled Master Builder, The Extraordinary World of James Patterson. The photos made my basement look like something from a museum, and the article described my work with words like innovative, masterful, and inspiring. But the real surprise came when the magazine hit newsstands. My phone started ringing that very day. The first call was from a collector in Texas who wanted to commission a custom locomotive. The second was from a museum in Colorado asking if I'd consider building a display layout for their model railroad exhibit. By the end of the week, I had 7 potential commissions and 3 interview requests from other hobby publications. Rebecca called me that Friday evening, and I could hear the excitement in her voice before she even spoke. Dad, I'm at Barnes & Noble, and there's a stack of model railroad magazines by the register with your layout on the cover. The cover, Dad? It's not the cover story, sweetheart. Just a feature inside. I don't care. There's a little banner that says Master Builder Profile with a picture of your mountain scene. I bought 5 copies. You don't need 5 copies. 1 for me, 1 for Uncle Tony, 1 for my office, 1 for Marcus, and 1 to frame. She paused. Dad, I've been thinking about something. What's that? Remember when I said your trains were childish? I think I owe more people than just you. An apology. This confused me. What do you mean? I mean, I repeated that opinion to other people. My ex-husband, some friends, even some people at work. I basically told anyone who'd listen that my dad played with toy trains like a little kid. I felt a stab of hurt, even though our relationship had been repaired. Rebecca, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Because now I understand what you were actually doing down there. You weren't playing with toys, you were creating art. You were preserving memories. You were building something beautiful that brings joy to other people. She took a deep breath. I want to make this right. Would you be okay if I brought some people to see your layout? People I owe a better explanation to. What people? Well, Marcus's whole team, for starters. After seeing the magazine, he's been telling everyone at work about your basement. But also, some friends, maybe some neighbors. People who might appreciate what you've built. The idea made me nervous. Rebecca, I don't need you to prove anything to anyone. I'm not doing this for you, Dad. I'm doing it for me. I need people to know that when I was dismissing your work, I was being ignorant and small-minded. That weekend, Rebecca organized what she called an open studio event. She handled all the logistics, sent invitations, and even arranged for catering from the local deli. I was worried it would be awkward, but by Saturday afternoon, my basement was filled with genuinely interested visitors. Marcus brought his daughter Sarah and her family. The twins from his party were now my biggest fans, asking if they could help with future projects. Several of Rebecca's colleagues attended, including two who turned out to be serious model railroad enthusiasts themselves. But the most meaningful visitor was Mrs. Kowalski from 3 houses down. She was in her 80s and had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. "Jimmy, I had no idea you were doing all this down here," she said, carefully navigating the basement stairs with her walker. "My late husband, Edward, would have loved this. He worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad for 40 years. I spent 20 minutes showing her the replica station I'd built, based on photos from the 1940s. She pointed out details I'd gotten right, that only someone with railroad experience would notice. You know, Edward always said that model railroading wasn't about the trains. It was about recreating the world as it should be, where everything runs on time, everyone has a place to go, and all the important details are taken care of. That observation stayed with me long after the event ended. The following week brought news that changed everything. Jennifer Chen called to tell me that Pacific Model Railways had received more reader response to my article than any feature they'd published in 5 years. "We'd like to offer you a regular column," she said. "Monthly articles about building techniques, with step-by-step photos and instructions. We're thinking of calling it Patterson's Workshop." "A regular column?" "The response has been incredible, Mr. Patterson. Readers want to learn your methods, especially your weathering techniques and your approach to realistic scenery. We'd pay you $1,500 per article." I did quick math in my head. $1,500 a month was more than some of my factory paychecks had been. Would I have to travel? Mostly you'd work from home, photographing your techniques and writing about your process. Occasionally we might ask you to visit other layouts for comparison pieces, but nothing extensive. After I accepted, I called Rebecca with the news. "Dad, that's amazing. You're going to be a published writer." "I guess I am." "You know what this means, right? You've essentially started a new career at 55. Most people are thinking about retirement, and you're launching yourself as an expert in your field." She was right. I'd spent 30 years building things with my hands in a factory, and now I was going to spend the next chapter of my life building things with my hands for people who appreciated the artistry involved. The first column was scheduled to appear in 3 months, giving me time to develop my writing skills and plan out a series of instructional articles. Marcus connected me with a technical writing consultant who helped me learn how to explain complex processes in clear, accessible language. But the most surprising development came when Rebecca suggested we collaborate on something. "Dad, what if we created a website to go along with your magazine column? I could handle the web design and social media promotion, and you could post additional photos and videos of your building process. You want to work together?" I've been thinking about freelancing on the side, building a portfolio of small business marketing projects. Your new career could be my first client. "Rebecca, I can't afford to pay you what you're worth." "Who said anything about paying me? This is family. Besides, I owe you about 1,000,000 hours of unpaid labor for all the times you helped me with school projects." We spent the next month developing the website together. Rebecca taught me about digital photography and video editing, while I explained the technical aspects of model building in ways that would translate well to online content. Working together reminded me of when she was 8 years old, carefully painting tiny figures while I worked on track layouts. She'd always had steady hands and an eye for detail, qualities that served her well in both marketing and model making. The website launched the same week my first magazine column appeared. Within 48 hours, we had over 1,000 visitors and dozens of questions from readers wanting more detailed information about specific techniques. "Dad, look at this," Rebecca said, showing me her laptop screen during one of our weekly dinner meetings. "People from 12 different countries have visited the site. There's a guy in Australia asking if you ship custom buildings internationally." "Do I ship to Australia?" "I don't know. Do you want to?" The international interest led to my first major commissioned project, a replica of a Welsh mining town for a collector in England who'd read about my work online. The project would take 4 months and pay more than I'd made in my best year at the factory. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Children's Hospital reached out through the magazine to ask if I'd be interested in teaching model building workshops for long-term patients. The therapy department had read about my volunteer visits and thought the hands-on building process might be beneficial for kids undergoing extended treatment. Dr. Martinez thinks it could help with fine motor skills and provide a sense of accomplishment during difficult recovery periods, the program coordinator explained. I started the workshops 2 weeks later, teaching small groups of children between ages 8 and 16 how to build simple structures and paint basic figures. The sessions were scheduled around treatment schedules, and kids could work on projects over multiple visits. The first group included a 10-year-old named Kevin, who was receiving treatment for leukemia. He'd been in and out of the hospital for 6 months and had lost interest in most activities, but something about the precision required for model building caught his attention. "Mr. Jimmy, how do you get the windows so straight?" "Practice and patience, Kevin. Here, let me show you a trick." By his third session, Kevin was teaching newer kids techniques I'd shown him. His mother told me it was the first time in months she'd seen him excited about anything. "He talks about the buildings he's going to make when he gets home," she said. "He's already planning a whole city." These workshops became the most rewarding part of my new career. The magazine featured them in a follow-up article titled Healing Through Building, which brought even more attention to the therapeutic applications of model making. 6 months after that first phone call from Pacific Model Railways, I found myself sitting in my basement office, a space Rebecca had helped me create for managing my growing business, looking at a schedule that included 3 major commissions, monthly magazine deadlines, weekly hospital workshops, and a waiting list of people wanting custom work. Rebecca knocked on the basement door and came down with 2 cups of coffee, a ritual we'd established during our weekly business planning sessions. "Dad, I have news. Good news or bad news. Depends on your perspective. I got the promotion at work." I felt a surge of pride. "Rebecca, that's wonderful. When do you start?" "Next month. Senior marketing coordinator, with my own office and everything." She sat down across from my desk. "But here's the thing. I also got an offer to handle marketing for 3 other small businesses, based on the work we've done with your website." "That's even better news. It means I have a choice to make. I can take the promotion and keep working for Marcus, or I can leave and start my own consulting business." I studied her face. "What do you want to do?" "Honestly, I want to work for myself. I want to help small business owners tell their authentic stories, the way we've done with yours. I've learned more about marketing in the last 6 months working with you than I did in 2 years trying to be impressive at corporate events." She pulled out her laptop and showed me a business plan she'd been developing. "I want to specialize in working with craftspeople, artists, and small manufacturers. People who make things with their hands, but don't know how to market themselves. I think there's a real need for someone who understands both the traditional business world and the world of authentic craftsmanship." Looking at her detailed plans and projected income, I realized my daughter had found her own path to success, one that honored both her professional skills and her family values. "What does Marcus think about you leaving?" "He's the one who suggested it. He said Pinnacle is doing well enough now that they can handle their marketing internally, and he thinks I have too much entrepreneurial spirit to work for someone else long-term." 6 months later, Rebecca Patterson Consulting had 8 clients and a waiting list. Her specialty was helping skilled craftspeople translate their expertise into sustainable businesses. She developed a reputation for understanding both the creative process and the business fundamentals needed to make artistry profitable. Our monthly dinner meetings had evolved into weekly business strategy sessions where we shared insights from our respective industries. Rebecca taught me about pricing strategies and client management, while I helped her understand the mindset and challenges of people who work with their hands. "You know what's funny, Dad?" "What's that?" "Remember when I was embarrassed by your factory stories? Now those stories are part of my marketing expertise. When I talk to craftspeople about the importance of quality and reliability, I tell them about the 30 years you spent perfecting your skills on an assembly line. And what do they say? They get it immediately. They understand that real expertise comes from years of showing up and doing the work, not from having the fanciest equipment or the most impressive credentials. On my 56th birthday, Rebecca threw the backyard party she'd promised the year before. But this time, the guest list included people from 3 different worlds: my old factory friends, my new magazine, and commissioned work clients, and Rebecca's small business network. Tony told his Vietnam stories to a group that included a furniture maker from Portland, a ceramic artist from Chicago, and a jewelry designer from Denver. Pete shared factory wisdom with entrepreneurs who were learning to manage their first employee. Marcus brought his grandchildren to see my latest train editions. But the moment that made the whole year worth it came when Kevin, the young patient from my hospital workshops, arrived with his parents and a shoebox full of buildings he'd completed during his treatment. "Mr. Jimmy, look what I made." He carefully unpacked a miniature school, complete with playground equipment and tiny painted children. "Mom says, when I'm better, you might teach me how to make mountains." "I'd be honored to, Kevin." As I watched him show his work to other guests, explaining his building techniques with the same pride I felt about my own projects, I realized something important had happened over the past year. I hadn't just found a new career or repaired my relationship with Rebecca. I'd discovered that the things that made me supposedly embarrassing, my attention to detail, my patience with time-consuming processes, my genuine interest in other people's stories, these were actually the qualities that made me valuable. The man my daughter had been ashamed of was the same man whose work was now featured in national magazines, whose skills were sought after by collectors around the world, and whose teaching methods were helping children heal. I hadn't changed who I was. I'd just found people who appreciated who I'd always been. And sometimes, that makes all the difference. 2 years after my magazine career began, I received a phone call that would test everything I'd learned about standing up for who I was. "Mr. Patterson, this is Thomas Whitfield from Whitfield Entertainment Group. I'm calling about a television opportunity." I was in my basement workshop, putting finishing touches on a commission for a museum in Vermont. The name Whitfield sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. "What kind of television opportunity?" "We're developing a reality competition show called Master Makers, where skilled craftspeople compete in weekly challenges. Think of it as a cross between cooking competitions and home improvement shows, but focused on traditional crafts and artistry." The concept intrigued me. "And you're interested in model railroading?" "Actually, we're interested in you specifically. Your magazine articles have gained quite a following, and our research team believes you'd be an excellent mentor figure for the show. Someone who could guide contestants and judge their work." This was far beyond anything I'd imagined when I started writing for Pacific Model Railways. "I'm not sure I'd be comfortable on television." "That's exactly why we want you, Mr. Patterson. In a world full of polished TV personalities, audiences are hungry for authentic expertise. Your background, 30 years in manufacturing, self-taught artistry, genuine passion for craftsmanship, that's the story we want to tell." He explained that filming would take place over 6 weeks in Los Angeles, with contestants competing in challenges involving woodworking, metalworking, textile arts, and precision modeling. My role would be to evaluate technical skill and mentor contestants struggling with detailed work. "The pay is substantial," he added, mentioning a figure that made me sit down. "Plus, this could significantly expand your platform for teaching and promoting traditional craftsmanship." After I hung up, I called Rebecca immediately. "Dad, that's incredible. Whitfield Entertainment produces some of the biggest reality shows on television. I don't know anything about reality TV. What if I'm terrible at it?" "Are you kidding? You've been teaching people craftsmanship for 2 years now. The hospital kids love your workshops, your magazine readers send fan mail, and that furniture maker from Portland still calls you for advice." She had a point. "Teaching has become as natural to me as building. Besides," Rebecca continued, "this could be huge for both our businesses. Imagine the exposure for your commission work, and for my consulting practice, helping craftspeople market themselves." But there was something in the producer's tone that bothered me. When I mentioned this to Rebecca, she suggested I have an attorney review any contracts before signing. The contract arrived the following week, and it was more complex than anything I'd ever seen. Buried in the legal language were clauses about character development and story arc enhancement that made me uncomfortable. I called Thomas Whitfield for clarification. Mr. Patterson, these are standard reality TV provisions. Sometimes we need to recreate conversations or ask contestants to emphasize certain personality traits for dramatic effect. What kind of personality traits? Well, in your case, we'd probably play up the blue-collar everyman angle. You know, the humble factory worker who made good through determination and natural talent. There was that phrase again, blue-collar everyman. It reminded me of Rebecca's old attitude, reducing 30 years of skilled work to a convenient stereotype. Mr. Whitfield, I wasn't just a factory worker who got lucky. I spent decades developing expertise in precision manufacturing, quality control, and problem solving. That technical knowledge is what makes my model work exceptional. Of course. But television audiences relate better to simple narratives. The underdog story sells better than technical expertise. I felt a familiar frustration. So you want me to downplay my actual qualifications to fit a more marketable image? I wouldn't put it that way exactly, but that's exactly what he was suggesting. After everything I'd learned about the importance of authenticity, they wanted me to play a character based on stereotypes about working-class people. I asked for a week to consider the offer. That evening, Rebecca came over for our usual dinner and business meeting. I explained my concerns about the show's approach. Dad, maybe you're overthinking this. Reality TV always simplifies people's stories. That's just how the format works. But what if I don't want my stories simplified? Think about the bigger picture. This exposure could lead to book deals, more magazine work, maybe even your own instructional video series. You can't let perfect be the enemy of good. Her response bothered me. It sounded like the old Rebecca, the one who'd valued image over authenticity. Sweetheart, 2 years ago you learned the hard way that pretending to be someone else for career advancement doesn't work. Why are you encouraging me to do the same thing? She was quiet for a moment. Because this is different. You're not changing who you are. You're just emphasizing certain aspects of your background for a television audience. By downplaying other aspects. By letting them present my factory experience as something I overcame rather than something that taught me valuable skills. We argued about it for an hour. Rebecca couldn't understand why I was hesitating over what she saw as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I couldn't understand why she was pushing me to compromise my principles after we'd both learned how important authenticity was. Finally, she said something that stopped the conversation cold. Dad, sometimes I think you use this authenticity thing as an excuse to avoid taking risks. What do you mean? I mean, maybe you're not turning down this show because they want you to compromise your values. Maybe you're turning it down because you're scared of putting yourself out there on a bigger stage. The accusation stung because it forced me to examine my real motivations. Was I protecting my principles, or was I just afraid of failing on national television? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Rebecca's words and wondering if she was right. Had I become so focused on being authentic that I was missing opportunities to share my knowledge with a wider audience? The next morning, I called Marcus for advice. Jimmy, let me ask you something. What's your primary goal with your model railroad work? To create something beautiful and teach other people to do the same. And how many people currently read your magazine articles? Pacific Model Railways has about 40,000 subscribers. This television show could reach millions. If your goal is to teach craftsmanship, wouldn't a larger platform serve that purpose better? He made a compelling argument, but then he asked another question. However, would you still be teaching the same values if you had to present yourself as someone you're not? That was the heart of the issue. Could I effectively teach authenticity and precision while being inauthentic about my own background? I decided to call Thomas Whitfield with a counter-proposal. Mr. Whitfield, I'm interested in the show, but I need some changes to how my story is presented. What kind of changes? I want my factory experience presented as technical training, not as something I overcame. I want to talk about the engineering skills I learned, the quality control expertise I developed, and how that knowledge directly contributes to my model work. Mr. Patterson, I appreciate your passion, But our research shows that audiences respond better to Your research shows that audiences respond to authentic expertise when it's presented with respect. Look at cooking shows. They don't downplay chefs' formal training, they celebrate it. I could hear him conferring with someone in the background. Let me run this by our development team and get back to you. 3 days later, he called back with a revised offer. They would present my background as I requested, but with one condition: I would need to take on additional responsibilities as a technical consultant, helping design challenges that would showcase traditional manufacturing skills alongside artistic vision. We think this approach could differentiate our show from other competition programs. Instead of just testing creativity, we'd be testing real technical competency. This was more like it. They were asking me to contribute my expertise, not hide it. The contract negotiations took another month, with Rebecca handling many of the business details. Her experience with marketing contracts proved invaluable in protecting my interests, while ensuring the show could still tell compelling stories. "Dad, I owe you an apology," she said during one of our contract review sessions. "When I accused you of using authenticity as an excuse to avoid risks, I was projecting my own fears." "What do you mean?" "I've been worried that my business is growing too slowly, that I'm not being aggressive enough about expansion. When I saw this TV opportunity, I wanted you to take it partly because I thought it would validate my own career choices. And now I realize that sustainable success comes from staying true to your principles, even when it means turning down opportunities that don't align with your values." She was learning the same lesson I'd been practicing for 2 years. Filming for Master Makers began that fall. The experience was unlike anything I'd imagined. The production was massive, dozens of crew members, elaborate sets, and contestants who were genuinely skilled artisans from around the country. My fellow judges included Maria Santos, a master weaver from New Mexico, and David Chen, a furniture maker whose work had been featured in museums. Both had insisted on similar authenticity clauses in their contracts. The contestants ranged from a blacksmith in his 20s to a 67-year-old quilter who'd been perfecting her craft for 40 years. What they all shared was deep expertise in their chosen fields and genuine passion for traditional craftsmanship. The challenges we designed tested both technical skill and creative problem-solving. One week, contestants had to create functional furniture using only hand tools. Another week, they built working mechanical devices using traditional metalworking techniques. My role evolved beyond judging. I became the person contestants came to when they were struggling with precision work or needed advice on problem-solving approaches. The producers encouraged these mentoring moments, recognizing that they created some of the show's most compelling content. "Mr. Patterson," said Jamie, a young woodworker from Oregon, "I can't get this joint tight enough. Every time I think I have it, there's still a gap." "Jamie, let me show you something I learned on the factory floor about measuring tolerances." These teaching moments reminded me of my early days at Henderson Manufacturing, when experienced workers took time to show newcomers the tricks that made the difference between adequate work and excellent work. But the most meaningful episode involved a challenge that hit close to home. Contestants were asked to create detailed miniature scenes that told personal stories. I watched as they struggled with the same problems I'd solved over decades of model building: how to create realistic weathering, how to achieve proper scale relationships, how to make tiny details that would hold up under close examination. During judging, I found myself sharing stories about Linda's curtain making, about the memorial train station I'd built for my father, about the techniques I'd developed through years of trial and error. "The technical skill is impressive," I told the cameras. "But what makes these pieces special is that they contain genuine pieces of the maker's lives." That's what separates craft from manufacturing, the human story embedded in the work. When the episode aired, 6 months later, that quote became one of the most shared moments from the entire season. The show's impact exceeded everyone's expectations. Master Makers became a surprise hit, drawing audiences who were hungry for content that celebrated skill and patience over drama and conflict. My magazine circulation doubled, commission requests increased tenfold. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. Kevin, my young patient from the hospital workshops, now 13 and in remission, sent me a letter after watching the show. Mr. Jimmy, I saw you on TV and I was so proud. When my friends ask me about model building, I tell them I learned from someone famous. But what I really tell them is that you taught me that making something with your hands is a way of putting your heart into the world. Reading that letter reminded me why I'd been so insistent about authenticity during the contract negotiations. The values I'd been teaching in my basement workshop and hospital sessions were the same ones I wanted to share with a television audience. 6 months after the show aired, Rebecca's consulting business had grown to include 15 clients, many of whom had contacted her after seeing her father on television, but more importantly, she'd learned to market herself authentically, emphasizing her understanding of both traditional craftsmanship and modern business practices. Dad, remember when you asked me why I was pushing you to compromise for the TV show? I remember. I think I was testing whether the lessons we'd both learned were really solid, or if we'd abandon them when the stakes got high enough. And what did you discover? That authenticity isn't just a nice idea when things are easy. It's a practice that gets stronger every time you choose it over convenience. Looking back on that decision to negotiate for an authentic portrayal, rather than accepting a simplified stereotype, I realized I'd faced a more sophisticated version of the same choice Rebecca had presented me 3 years earlier. The world was still full of people who wanted to reduce my story to something more marketable, more digestible, more conventional. But I'd learned that the right opportunities, the ones worth taking, were the ones that valued who I actually was, rather than who I could pretend to be. And sometimes, insisting on being yourself doesn't limit your opportunities. Sometimes, it creates better ones than you could have imagined. The success of Master Makers opened doors I never expected, but it also brought challenges that tested everything I thought I understood about maintaining authenticity in a world that constantly tried to reshape you. 3 months after the show's finale aired, I received an invitation that made me question whether I'd learned anything at all from the past 4 years. Mr. Patterson, this is Catherine Ashworth from the Smithsonian Institution. We'd like to discuss acquiring one of your model railroad layouts for our permanent collection. I was sitting in my basement office, reviewing applications for my expanded hospital workshop program, when the call came. The Smithsonian, the most prestigious museum in America, wanted my work. Which layout are you interested in? Your Pennsylvania mining town display, the one featured in your third magazine article. Our curator of American industrial history believes it represents important documentation of mid-20th century working communities. The mining town was one of my most personal pieces. I'd built it as a tribute to my grandfather, who'd spent 40 years underground in the coal mines of western Pennsylvania. Every building, every figure, every detail reflected stories he'd told me about life in those communities. We'd like to display it as part of our new exhibit on American labor history, opening next spring. The layout would be accompanied by educational materials about the communities it represents and the traditional model-making techniques you employed. After the call ended, I sat staring at the mining town display in the corner of my basement. My grandfather had died when I was 16, but his stories lived on in this miniature world. The company store where miners bought everything on credit, the tiny houses where large families lived in cramped quarters, the small church where the community gathered for both celebrations and funerals. When I called Rebecca with the news, her reaction surprised me. Dad, that's incredible, but are you sure you want to give it up? It's the Smithsonian, sweetheart. Millions of people would see it. I know, but that piece means so much to you. Remember when you showed me the tiny miner's helmet you made for the figure of Great-Grandpa Joe? She was right. Unlike my commission work, which I built for other people, the mining town was built for me. It was my connection to family history, my way of honoring my grandfather's memory, but the opportunity was enormous. Catherine Ashworth had mentioned that the exhibit would include an interactive component where visitors could learn about traditional craftsmanship techniques. My work wouldn't just be displayed, it would be used to educate people about the value of skilled manual labor. I asked for time to think about it. That weekend, Tony came over for our monthly dinner. I'd told him about the Smithsonian offer, expecting him to be as excited as I was conflicted. Jimmy, let me ask you something. Why did you build that mining town? To honor Grandpa Joe's memory, to preserve the stories he told me. And if it's sitting in a museum in Washington, how does that serve those purposes? Well, more people would learn about that history, but you wouldn't be able to show it to the kids at the hospital. You wouldn't be able to add new buildings when you remember more of Grandpa's stories. It would become a museum piece instead of a living memorial. Tony had a point I hadn't considered. The mining town wasn't just a display, it was an ongoing conversation with my grandfather's memory. I added new details whenever I remembered another story, modified buildings when I learned more about historical accuracy, and shared family tales with visitors who showed genuine interest. Besides, Tony continued, didn't you learn anything from that TV show experience? Sometimes the bigger platform isn't worth it if you lose what made the work meaningful in the first place. But this felt different from the television situation. The Smithsonian wasn't asking me to change my story or downplay my background. They wanted to celebrate my work exactly as it was. I called Catherine Ashworth back with questions about the exhibit. Ms. Ashworth, would I be able to make modifications to the layout after it's installed? I'm afraid not, Mr. Patterson. Museum conservation standards require that we preserve pieces exactly as acquired. And would I be able to share the family stories behind specific elements? The educational materials would include some background information, but museum labels are necessarily brief and factual. Those two answers crystallized my concern. The Smithsonian wanted my mining town, but they wanted it frozen in time, stripped of the personal context that gave it meaning. Miss Ashworth, I appreciate the honor of this invitation, but I need to decline. May I ask why? This is a significant opportunity for recognition. Because this layout isn't finished, it may never be finished. It's my ongoing conversation with family history, and I'm not ready to end that conversation. She seemed genuinely puzzled. Mr. Patterson, a museum display would preserve your work for future generations. Surely that's more important than personal attachment. With respect, preservation isn't the same as keeping something alive. After I hung up, I called Rebecca to tell her about my decision. Dad, I'm proud of you. Are you? I just turned down the Smithsonian. You turned down an opportunity that would have changed the fundamental nature of your work. That's exactly what you taught me to do. She was right. I'd learned to recognize when opportunities came with hidden costs that weren't worth paying. But the conversation with Catherine Ashworth had planted a seed of an idea. If the Smithsonian wanted to display work that documented American labor history, why couldn't I create something new specifically for that purpose? Something that could live in a museum while leaving my personal memorial intact. I spent the next month researching industrial communities across America, gathering photographs and historical documents about textile mills in New England, steel towns in Pennsylvania, lumber camps in the Pacific Northwest. Instead of recreating my family's specific story, I could tell the broader story of American industrial workers. When I called Catherine Ashworth with my counter-proposal, she was intrigued. You'd create an entirely new layout for the museum? A comprehensive display showing how industrial communities evolved from the 1890s through the 1950s. Multiple scenes representing different industries and regions, but connected by shared themes of community, craftsmanship, and adaptation. How long would such a project take? Probably 2 years of full-time work, but it would be designed specifically for museum display, with educational components built into the layout itself. The project would be massive, essentially creating a museum-quality exhibition from scratch, but it would allow me to contribute to public education while keeping my personal work personal. The Smithsonian approved the proposal 6 weeks later, offering a commission that would cover my expenses plus a significant fee. More importantly, they agreed to let me work with their education department to design interactive elements that would teach visitors about traditional manufacturing techniques. Rebecca helped me structure the business side of the project, creating a timeline and budget that would allow me to maintain my other commitments while working on the commission. Dad, this is brilliant. You found a way to achieve their goals and yours without compromising either. I learned from someone who figured out how to build her own business instead of fitting into someone else's. The project began that fall. Working with Smithsonian historians and education specialists taught me things about my own country's industrial history that I'd never known. I learned about the company towns built by textile manufacturers, the boarding houses that housed single women working in factories, the ways communities adapted when primary industries moved elsewhere. Each scene I built became a research project. I corresponded with local historical societies, studied period photographs, even interviewed elderly people who remembered life in these communities. The work was more complex than anything I'd attempted, but it was also more meaningful. The interactive elements proved to be the most innovative aspect of the project. Working with museum educators, we designed stations where visitors could try traditional techniques, using hand tools to shape wood, operating simplified versions of industrial machinery, assembling miniature structures using period-appropriate methods. The goal, explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, the museum's education director, is to help visitors understand that industrial work requires genuine skill and intelligence. Too often people think of factory work as mindless, when actually it demands significant expertise. This matched everything I'd been trying to communicate through my magazine articles and television appearances. Industrial workers weren't just interchangeable parts in machines, they were skilled craftspeople whose knowledge made modern manufacturing possible. The project also brought unexpected personal rewards. Working with historical materials introduced me to stories that connected with my own family history in surprising ways. I discovered that my grandfather's mining community had been part of a broader network of industrial towns, each adapting similar challenges in creative ways. Most importantly, the research reminded me that my own story, factory worker turned craftsman and teacher, wasn't unique. It was part of a long tradition of American workers who used their hands to build both practical things and beautiful things, often at the same time. 18 months into the project, I received another call from Catherine Ashworth. Mr. Patterson, I wanted to update you on the exhibition planning. Based on early previews, we're expecting this to be one of our most popular displays. The interactive elements are tested extremely well with focus group. That's wonderful to hear. But I also wanted to ask about something else. We've been contacted by several other museums interested in commissioning similar work. Would you be open to creating a traveling version of this exhibition? The idea of my work touring the country, teaching people about American industrial history and traditional craftsmanship, was more than I'd ever imagined possible, but it would also mean years more work, extensive travel, and coordination with multiple institutions. Ms. Ashworth, let me discuss this with my family and get back to you. That evening, Rebecca came over for dinner, and I shared the touring exhibition possibility. Dad, what do you want to do? I want to say yes, but I'm worried about losing focus. I don't want to become so busy with big projects that I stop doing the small things that matter. Like the hospital workshops? Exactly. Or helping individual collectors with their projects. Or just having time to work on personal pieces. We talked for hours about how to balance opportunity with purpose. Rebecca helped me realize that the question wasn't whether to take on new projects, but how to structure them so they supported rather than replaced the work I was already doing. What if, she suggested, we made the touring exhibition conditional on the museums providing space for educational workshops? You could teach your techniques in each city, training local craftspeople to continue the programs after you leave. It was a brilliant solution. Instead of just displaying historical work, the touring exhibition could plant seeds for ongoing craftsmanship education in communities across the country. When I called Catherine Ashworth back, she was enthusiastic about the workshop component. Mr. Patterson, that approach would significantly increase the educational impact. We could partner with local trade schools, community colleges, and maker spaces in each city. The touring exhibition was scheduled to begin 2 years after the Smithsonian opening, giving me time to complete the initial project and develop curriculum for the educational workshops. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire experience was realizing that I'd learned to recognize the difference between opportunities that enhanced my mission and opportunities that distracted from it. The Smithsonian hadn't just acquired my work, they'd helped me understand that my work was part of something larger and more important than I'd realized. And in finding ways to serve that larger purpose without sacrificing what made the work personal, I'd discovered a sustainable approach to success that felt authentic at every level. 5 years after that devastating text message from Rebecca, I found myself standing in the Smithsonian Museum of American History, watching hundreds of visitors interact with the exhibition I'd spent 3 years creating. Children pressed buttons to operate miniature machinery, teenagers examined detailed dioramas through magnifying glasses, and adults read plaques explaining the connection between historical craftsmanship and modern manufacturing. But what struck me most wasn't the scale of the achievement. It was watching a grandfather explain to his 7-year-old granddaughter how his own father had worked in a steel mill, using my miniature steel town as a reference point for family stories that might otherwise have been lost. "Grandpa, did great-grandpa really make things like this?" "He did, sweetheart. And just like the man who built this display, he took pride in doing his job exactly right, even when nobody was watching." That moment crystallized something I'd been thinking about throughout the exhibition's development. Authentic success wasn't measured by recognition or financial reward, but by how effectively your work helped other people connect with what mattered most. The opening ceremony had been held the previous evening, attended by museum dignitaries, education officials, and craft experts from around the country. Rebecca had flown in from Chicago, where her consulting business now included clients in 12 states. Marcus Wellington had driven down from Baltimore with his wife, bringing congratulations from his entire team at Pinnacle Marketing. But the guest who meant the most to me was Kevin, now 18, and about to start college with a scholarship he'd earned, partly through essays about how craftsmanship education had helped him cope with his childhood cancer treatment. "Mr. Jimmy, I can't believe all this started in your basement," he said, standing beside a display that explained traditional woodworking joints. "When I was sick, learning to build those tiny houses made me feel like I was creating something that would last forever. Now I understand that's exactly what you were teaching me to do." Kevin had decided to study industrial design, combining his interest in traditional craftsmanship with modern manufacturing technology. His college application essays had described how model building workshops during cancer treatment had taught him patience, precision, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with his own hands. "I want to design products that are built to last, like the things you taught me to make," he'd explained during one of our recent conversations. "Everything today is disposable, but you showed me that making something well is a form of respect for the materials, for the user, and for yourself." Those words had stayed with me throughout the final months of exhibition preparation. The touring component was scheduled to begin in 6 months, with stops in 15 cities over 2 years. Each location would feature the historical displays alongside hands-on workshops where I'd teach traditional techniques to local craftspeople, educators, and community members. The first stop would be Detroit, at the Henry Ford Museum, where the exhibition would be paired with displays about automotive manufacturing and the evolution of American industrial design. The irony wasn't lost on me. The city where Marcus's father had worked as a plumber would be the first to host an exhibition, celebrating the intelligence and skill of manual labor. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of the touring schedule was the final stop. My hometown of Maplewood Heights, where the local community college had agreed to establish a permanent craftsmanship education center based on my curriculum. "Dad, you're bringing everything full circle," Rebecca had said when the schedule was finalized. "You started by being embarrassed about your background, and you're ending by helping other people celebrate theirs." She was right, though I'd never thought about it in those terms. Somewhere along the way, the work had evolved from proving my worth to helping others recognize their own. Rebecca's business had evolved similarly. Her client base now consisted primarily of skilled craftspeople, family manufacturers, and traditional artisans who needed help translating their expertise into sustainable businesses. She'd developed a reputation for understanding both the creative process and the business fundamentals needed to make authentic work profitable. I learned something important from watching your career develop, she'd told me during a recent strategy session. Success doesn't come from abandoning who you are, it comes from finding better ways to be who you are. Her approach to marketing emphasized storytelling, community building, and long-term relationships over quick profits and flashy campaigns. Clients came to her specifically because she understood the difference between authentic promotion and empty image making. One of her most successful campaigns had been for a family furniture maker in North Carolina, whose business was struggling to compete with mass-produced alternatives. Instead of trying to make their products seem cheaper or more trendy, Rebecca had helped them tell the story of their five-generation family tradition, their sustainable forestry practices, and the specific skills that made their furniture superior to factory alternatives. People don't just buy furniture from them now, Rebecca explained. They buy into a story about craftsmanship, sustainability, and family tradition. The furniture costs more than the mass-produced stuff, but customers understand why it's worth it. This matched my own experience with commissioned model work. Collectors didn't hire me because I was the cheapest option. They hired me because they understood the value of work done with genuine expertise and personal investment. The Smithsonian exhibition's success had led to requests for similar projects from institutions around the world. Museums in Germany wanted displays about traditional woodworking. Educational centers in Japan were interested in collaborative projects about precision manufacturing. Cultural institutions in Canada had proposed exhibitions about lumber communities and mining towns. Each opportunity was tempting, but I'd learned to evaluate them carefully against my core mission, teaching people to value skilled manual work and helping them understand the intelligence and artistry involved in traditional craftsmanship. Some requests clearly aligned with that mission. Others seemed more interested in spectacle than education. I'd become comfortable saying no to opportunities that didn't serve my deeper purposes, even when they offered significant financial rewards or professional recognition. This decision-making process had been tested most severely 6 months earlier, when a major television network approached me about hosting my own craftsmanship reality show. The concept was appealing, a program that would celebrate traditional techniques while teaching viewers practical skills, but the network's vision emphasized drama and competition over education and community. We're thinking of a format where master craftspeople compete in increasingly difficult challenges, the producer had explained. Elimination style, with a cash prize for the winner. What would viewers learn from that? They'd learn that craftsmanship is exciting, that there's real skill involved. But they'd also learn that craftsmanship was about defeating other people rather than mastering yourself. About speed rather than patience. About winning rather than sharing knowledge. I'd declined the offer and instead proposed a collaboration with the public television network that had produced several documentaries about my work. Together, we developed a 6-part series called Making It Last, which focused on teaching traditional techniques while exploring the communities and cultures that had developed them. Each episode featured a different craft: woodworking, metalworking, textile arts, ceramics, precision modeling and stone carving, with expert practitioners demonstrating techniques while sharing the history and philosophy behind their work. The series aired during prime time on educational television, reaching millions of viewers who were hungry for content that respected both their intelligence and their interest in learning practical skills. Response had been overwhelmingly positive, with many viewers writing to describe projects they'd started after watching the show. More importantly, the series had inspired several universities to develop formal programs in traditional craftsmanship, treating manual skills as legitimate academic subjects worthy of serious study and preservation. You've helped change how people think about this kind of work. Dr. Martinez from the Smithsonian Education Department had told me. 10 years ago, traditional crafts were seen as hobbies or historical curiosities. Now they're being recognized as important forms of knowledge that deserve institutional support. That shift in perception had personal meaning beyond professional satisfaction. When I thought back to Rebecca's original embarrassment about my interests and background, I realized that her attitude had reflected broader cultural prejudices against manual work and traditional skills. By insisting on authentic representation of my expertise, By refusing to downplay the intelligence required for precision manufacturing, by demonstrating that craftsmanship deserved the same respect as any other form of expertise, I'd contributed to changing those prejudices in some small way. The impact was visible in my expanded hospital workshop program, which now served 3 facilities and had trained dozens of volunteers to continue the work. Children undergoing treatment learned traditional building techniques, but they also learned about patience, precision, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful, despite difficult circumstances. Kevin's recovery had been one of many success stories. The program had helped children develop fine motor skills, provided therapeutic distraction during treatment, and given young patients a sense of accomplishment during periods when their bodies were failing them. What you've created here goes far beyond teaching model building. Dr. Susan Chen, the head of pediatric oncology, had told me during a recent program evaluation. These children learn that they can still create something meaningful, even when everything else in their lives feels out of control. That observation had led to expansion beyond the children's hospital. We developed programs for senior centers, where elderly residents shared traditional skills with younger community members while learning new techniques themselves. We'd created workshops for veterans dealing with PTSD, using the meditative aspects of detailed handwork as part of therapy programs. Each expansion reinforced the same lesson. People of all ages and backgrounds craved opportunities to work with their hands, to create something tangible, to connect with traditions that valued skill and patience over speed and convenience. But perhaps the most satisfying development had been watching Rebecca apply these principles to her own family life. She'd recently married David Chen, a furniture maker she'd met through her consulting work. Their relationship had grown from mutual respect for each other's craftsmanship, his with wood, hers with words and business strategy. David makes furniture the way you build model towns, she'd told me. Every joint perfect, every detail considered, everything built to last for generations. Their wedding had been the kind of celebration I'd always hoped my birthday party could have been. Authentic, personal, filled with people who genuinely cared about each other, and focused on what actually mattered rather than what looked impressive. Uncle Tony had told his best stories. Pete and Dorothy had shared memories of Rebecca as a child. Marcus and his family had brought homemade gifts. David's fellow craftspeople had created a wedding present together. A dining room table built from wood salvaged from the factory where I'd worked for 30 years. We wanted something that connected all the important parts of our story. David had explained when they presented it. Your work history, Rebecca's family traditions, and our commitment to building something that will last. Sitting around that table during family dinners, I often thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. It had started with disappointment and conflict, but it had led to deeper understanding and stronger relationships. Now, as I watched the final day of exhibition visitors exploring my Smithsonian display, I realized that the most important lesson hadn't been about standing up for myself. It had been about understanding what was truly worth standing up for. Rebecca appeared beside me as I watched a group of teenagers carefully examining the details of my miniature mining town. Dad, I have something to tell you. What's that, sweetheart? David and I are expecting our first child. I felt a surge of joy so strong it nearly knocked me over. Rebecca, that's wonderful. I've been thinking about what kind of values we want to pass on to our child, she continued. And I keep coming back to the lessons you taught me even when I was too stubborn to listen. What lessons are those? That authenticity is more valuable than approval. That real success comes from doing meaningful work well, not from impressing people who don't understand its value. And that the best way to honor your family is to be proud of where you come from, while still growing into who you're meant to become. We stood together watching families explore the exhibition, children learning about their heritage, adults reconnecting with family stories they'd almost forgotten. You know what I'm most grateful for? Rebecca asked. What? That when I canceled your birthday party for being embarrassing, you didn't change who you were to win me back. You stayed exactly who you were until I learned to see your worth. I thought about that for a moment. Actually, sweetheart, I did change. I learned to value myself the way I should have all along. She smiled. Well, In that case, I'm grateful you became who you were always meant to be. As we left the museum that evening, I realized that the story, which had begun with a canceled birthday party and a devastating text message, had become something neither Rebecca nor I could have imagined. A legacy of authenticity that would continue through her work, through my educational program, through the children who'd learned traditional skills, and now through the grandchild who would grow up understanding that every kind of honest work deserves respect. The evening was clear and warm as we walked toward the parking garage. Rebecca linked her arm through mine, the way she used to when she was 8 years old and proud to be seen with her father. "Dad, what do you want for your 60th birthday?" I thought about the question seriously. 5 years ago, I wanted recognition and acceptance. Now I had both, but they mattered less than I'd expected. "I want exactly what I have," I said. "Work that matters, people who understand its value, and family who aren't ashamed of where we came from." "Well, in that case, this birthday party is going to be easy to plan." As we drove home together, I reflected on how completely our relationship had been transformed. Rebecca had evolved from someone embarrassed by her background into someone who built her career on helping others celebrate theirs. I had evolved from someone seeking validation into someone confident enough to create it for others. But most importantly, we'd both learned that the best kind of success comes not from changing who you are to fit the world's expectations, but from finding the parts of the world that appreciate who you've always been, and then helping to expand those parts until there's room for everyone to be authentic. The story that had started with a daughter too embarrassed to celebrate her father had become a story about a father and daughter working together to help other people celebrate themselves. And that, I realized, was the only kind of happy ending that actually mattered. 3 weeks after returning from Washington, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my basement workshop, preparing materials for the next hospital session, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a young woman in her 20s standing on my porch, holding what appeared to be a small wooden box. "Mr. Patterson? My name is Amanda Rodriguez. I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I wanted to thank you personally." I invited her in, curious about what had brought her to my door. "I saw your exhibition at the Smithsonian," she explained, settling into my living room. "My grandmother brought me. She grew up in a textile mill town in Massachusetts, very similar to one of the communities you recreated." Amanda opened the wooden box she'd been carrying, revealing a collection of tiny, intricately carved figures. "My grandmother started telling me stories about her childhood after seeing your display, about the women who worked in the mills, the families who lived in company housing, the skills that were passed down through generations." The figures were beautifully crafted, each one representing a different aspect of mill life. A woman operating a loom, children playing in a mill yard, men maintaining machinery. "I'm a social worker now, but my grandmother taught me wood carving when I was little. After seeing your work, I realized I wanted to document her stories the same way you documented your grandfather's mining community." She explained that she'd spent the past month interviewing her grandmother, recording stories that might otherwise be lost. Each carved figure represented a specific memory, a particular person her grandmother had known. "But here's the thing, Mr. Patterson. My grandmother is 92. If I'd waited much longer to ask about these stories, they would have died with her. Your exhibition reminded me that family history isn't just something to be remembered, it's something to be preserved and shared." This conversation sparked an idea that would consume the next phase of my career. Over the following weeks, I began reaching out to historical societies, senior centers, and community organizations with a proposal. What if we created a national program that combined traditional craftsmanship, education, with oral history preservation? The concept was simple but powerful. Older community members would share stories about their work experiences, family traditions, and local history while learning to document those stories through hands-on crafts projects. Younger participants would learn traditional techniques while gaining direct access to first-hand accounts of how their communities had evolved. The first pilot program launched at the Maplewood Heights Senior Center, where I'd grown up attending events with my parents. 15 participants, ranging in age from 65 to 91, committed to a 6-month program that would culminate in a community exhibition of their work. Margaret Sullivan, 83, had worked in the Henderson manufacturing office for 40 years. She'd never considered herself crafty, but she became fascinated with creating miniature replicas of the office buildings where she'd spent her career. Jimmy, I never realized how much history I witnessed until I started trying to recreate it, she told me during our third session. I remember when they installed the first computer system, when women started wearing pants to work instead of dresses, when the factory floor was reorganized for efficiency. Her miniature office scenes became incredibly detailed, complete with period-appropriate furniture, clothing, and technology, but more importantly, they became conversation starters for stories that helped younger community members understand how dramatically the workplace had changed during her lifetime. Frank Kowalski, the 87-year-old widower from down the street, had been reluctant to join initially. "I'm not an artist, Jimmy. I fix things." "That's different." But when I suggested he create a replica of the auto repair shop where he'd worked for 50 years, his interest was piqued. His workshop scenes became incredibly authentic, featuring tiny tools he'd actually used, miniature cars representing models he'd repaired, even scaled-down versions of repair manuals from different decades. Each era required different skills, he explained to younger participants. Cars got more complicated, but also more reliable. You had to keep learning, or you'd get left behind. The program's success led to expansion throughout the region. Community colleges began offering college credit for participation. Local libraries started hosting exhibitions of the completed projects. Historical societies began collecting the oral histories that accompanied each crafted piece. But the most meaningful expansion came when Rebecca suggested we develop a version specifically for families. "Dad, what if parents and grandparents worked on projects together with their children? You could teach the technical skills while they share family stories." The family workshops became wildly popular, with waiting lists extending months in advance. 3 generations would work side by side, grandparents sharing memories while grandchildren learned traditional techniques. Parents found themselves discovering family stories they'd never heard. One particularly memorable session involved the Chen family, David's relatives who had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s. The grandfather, Master Chen, was a traditional furniture maker who had struggled to find work when he first arrived in America. In Taiwan, furniture making was a respected profession, he explained through his grandson's translation. In America, people thought I was just a manual laborer. Working together on miniature recreations of traditional Chinese furniture, 3 generations of the Chen family explored how their craftsmanship traditions had adapted to American markets, while maintaining essential cultural elements. The project revealed tensions and triumphs that had shaped their family experience. Master Chen had initially resisted using power tools, preferring traditional hand methods. His son had embraced American manufacturing efficiency to build a successful business. The grandson, David, was now combining both approaches in his contemporary furniture designs. "We each found our own way to honor the tradition while adapting to new circumstances," David's father reflected. "Maybe that's what immigration really means, keeping what matters most while learning to thrive in a different environment." These family workshops reinforced something I'd been learning throughout my own journey. Authenticity wasn't about refusing to change or grow. It was about understanding which changes enhanced your core values and which changes betrayed them. The program's reputation spread through word of mouth and social media documentation. Rebecca had created online platforms where participants could share their projects and stories, building communities that extended far beyond local workshops. Educational institutions began requesting specialized versions of the program. A university in California wanted workshops focused on agricultural history. A community college in Texas was interested in exploring the cultural impact of oil industry development. A technical school in Michigan wanted to document the evolution of automotive manufacturing through the perspectives of retired workers. Each adaptation required research and curriculum development, but the core principle remained constant. People's work experiences contained valuable knowledge that deserved preservation and respect. The program's most ambitious expansion came when the State Department approached us about developing international versions that could facilitate cultural exchange. Mr. Patterson, explained Cultural Affairs Officer Janet Morrison, we're interested in programs that help American communities understand their connections to global economic and cultural developments. Your model could be adapted to explore how local American industries relate to parallel developments in other countries. The first international workshop paired the Maplewood Heights textile workers with a group from Lancashire, England, where similar mill communities had experienced parallel economic transitions. Through video conferences and collaborative projects, participants shared stories about how their communities had adapted when traditional industries changed. Margaret Sullivan found herself corresponding with a retired mill worker from Manchester who had experienced remarkably similar workplace changes during the same time periods. Their shared project, recreating textile machinery from different eras, revealed how technological innovations had affected workers on both sides of the Atlantic. I never realized that what happened in our little town was part of something much bigger, Margaret observed. We weren't alone in figuring out how to adapt. These international connections led to invitations to speak at conferences about the intersection of craftsmanship, education, oral history preservation, and community development. I found myself presenting at universities, policy institutes, and cultural organizations around the country. The speaking engagements were nerve-wracking initially. Despite years of television appearances and magazine interviews, addressing academic audiences felt intimidating. But I discovered that the same principles that had guided my craftsmanship education applied to public speaking: preparation, patience, and genuine respect for your audience. My presentations focused on practical applications rather than theoretical frameworks. I brought examples of participant work, shared specific stories about community impact, and demonstrated techniques that audience members could adapt for their own programs. The response was consistently positive. But what surprised me most was how often academics and policy experts expressed frustration with their own field's disconnection from practical, hands-on knowledge. Dr. Rodriguez studies economic development, but she's never actually talked to people who lived through plant closures. One conference organizer confided, "Your workshop model gives academics access to perspectives they can't get from data analysis alone." This observation led to the development of research partnerships with universities studying post-industrial community development. Our workshop participants became research collaborators, their documented stories contributing to academic understanding of how communities adapt to economic transitions. The research component added new dimensions to the program without changing its essential character. Participants knew their stories were contributing to broader understanding of American economic and social history, which gave additional meaning to their craftsmanship projects. But the most personally satisfying development came when Kevin, now in his second year of college, approached me about creating a student version of the program. "Mr. Jimmy, I want to start workshops on campus where students can learn traditional techniques while interviewing older community members about local history." His college had a significant population of first-generation students whose families had immigrant or working-class backgrounds. Many of these students felt disconnected from campus culture, which emphasized theoretical learning over practical skills. I think hands-on projects would help students connect their family experiences to their academic studies, Kevin explained. Plus, the older generation in this area has amazing stories that aren't being preserved anywhere. The student program launched with 12 participants, all of whom had family connections to local industries that had shaped the region's development. Working with senior center volunteers, students created collaborative projects that documented everything from steel production to agriculture to small business development. The intergenerational exchange benefited both groups. Students gained practical skills and historical perspective, while older participants felt valued for their knowledge and experience. Several collaborations led to ongoing mentorship relationships that extended beyond the workshop format. "These young people understand technology in ways I never will," explained Harold Martinez, a retired steelworker who'd partnered with a computer science student. "But I understand manufacturing processes in ways they're just learning about. Together, we can create something neither of us could manage alone." The student program's success led to formal partnerships with educational institutions throughout the region. Rebecca's consulting business evolved to include curriculum development and program administration, creating sustainable funding models that allowed workshops to continue without constant fundraising efforts. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. 2 years after declining the Smithsonian's original request for my personal mining town display, Catherine Ashworth called with an update about visitor response to the Industrial History exhibition. "Mr. Patterson, I wanted to share some data that might interest you. The interactive educational components of your exhibition have generated more positive visitor feedback than any display in the museum's recent history." She explained that families were spending an average of 90 minutes in the exhibition space, far longer than typical museum visits. More importantly, post-visit surveys indicated that the exhibition was changing how people thought about manual labor and traditional skills. Visitors consistently report that they're going home with new respect for their own family work histories, Catherine continued. Parents are having conversations with children about grandparents' careers that they'd never considered important before. The exhibition's success had inspired the Smithsonian to develop additional programs focusing on the intersection of craftsmanship, community history, and cultural preservation. They were planning workshops, lecture series, and collaborative projects with communities throughout the country. "We'd like to offer you a position as a consulting curator for these expanded programs," Catherine proposed. "The role would involve helping other communities develop projects similar to what you've created in Pennsylvania." The offer was attractive, but it would require extensive travel and time away from my local programs. After discussing it with Rebecca and David, I proposed a modified arrangement. I would consult on program development and train local coordinators, but the actual workshops would be managed by people embedded in each community. "The most important aspect of this work is the local knowledge," I explained to Catherine. "National coordination can help with methodology and funding, but the stories and relationships have to come from within each community." This approach proved more sustainable and effective than centralized management. Communities developed programs that reflected their specific histories and cultural characteristics while maintaining the core elements that made the workshop successful. The consulting role also allowed me to maintain my other commitments: hospital workshops, family programs, commissioned artwork, and magazine writing. Instead of choosing between different aspects of my career, I'd found ways to integrate them into a comprehensive approach to craftsmanship education. As I approached my 60th birthday, I realized that the journey, which had begun with Rebecca's embarrassment about my background, had evolved into something neither of us could have imagined: a sustainable model for helping communities preserve their knowledge, celebrate their tradition, and bridge generational divides through shared creative work. The birthday party Rebecca planned that year reflected everything we'd learned about authentic celebration. Held in our backyard, it together people from every phase of my journey: factory colleagues, magazine readers, television crew members, Smithsonian collaborators, workshop participants, hospital staff, and 3 generations of family members. Uncle Tony told his stories to workshop participants who shared their own tales of military service and community development. Kevin demonstrated modeling techniques to children who reminded me of myself at 8 years old, carefully painting tiny figures with complete concentration. Margaret Sullivan explained textile history to Rebecca's marketing colleagues, who were learning to appreciate the complexity of traditional manufacturing. But the moment that crystallized the entire experience came when my future grandchild, still months from being born, was toasted by a gathering that included people whose lives had been touched by the simple decision to value authenticity over approval. Standing in my backyard, surrounded by genuine relationships built through shared respect for skilled work and honest storytelling, I understood that the most important birthday gift hadn't been professional recognition or financial success. It has been the discovery that being exactly who you are, without apology or compromise, creates space for other people to do the same. And in that space, communities form, knowledge transfers, traditions continue, and families heal. The story that began with a canceled birthday party has become a story about the birthday parties that happen every day when people choose to celebrate what's real rather than what's impressive. And those celebrations, I'd learned, never really end. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.